Hello, everyone. My name is John Williams. I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute of Leadership and Management, and I welcome you to our monthly live show on LinkedIn, Leadership at the Edge, sharing ideas across the community of leadership practice in every context, everywhere. Each month, I'm joined by senior leaders from around the world to discuss their real-life experiences, to challenge some outdated leadership practices, and to offer a fresh take on the issues that today's leaders face. And we invite you to join the conversation and add your questions and reflections in the LinkedIn comments section on your screen. Today, we'll be revisiting the perennial challenge of leadership, which is learning and development. And taking a particular slant on that, I'm privileged to have co-founder, director, and chief creative officer of Inspire Your Genius, Caroline Esterson, as my guest. Caroline champions. Hiya, Caroline. Hello. Now, Caroline champions new and aspiring leaders to step up with confidence and gravitas. And we might revisit gravitas again, actually, during this conversation, so that they can hit the ground running. And Caroline's passion is to ignite the possibilities for success by making the workplace more human. So who better to share their expert insights? Caroline, welcome.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone that's joining us today. It'll be lovely to have a discussion with you all, so get those comments working for us.
Absolutely right. Brilliant. Now, Caroline, we are, I suppose we're in post-pandemic period now, aren't we? And many people thought that after the pandemic, things, and I put things in inverted commas, I think probably, would slip slowly yet steadily back into the range of normal challenges that we used to get at work.
Yeah.
How likely do you think it is that leaders in particular will have that wish granted for them?
Ooh, I feel like a magic fairy now. I'd love to be able to press my wand and sprinkle fairy dust over everybody. I think that what we've learned is that normal doesn't really exist, does it? Mm-hmm. I think that the pandemic has taught us that really important lesson that we have to be ready for anything at any time. So that sense of agility, flexibility, resilience to be able to cope are all really core qualities that we need in everybody in organizations now.
Interesting that you say in everybody, because one of the things, and I'm thinking particularly, you mentioned agility there. One of the principles of agile leadership and stuff like that is that in a sense, as we at the Institute say, leadership is is everywhere. Do you think that we're moving closer to that point where leadership figures accept that leadership is everywhere, so that they allow workforces to display that agility and innovation?
You know what? I really think that we are. I mean, we've just been working with one organisation last week that has, for want of a better word, I don't like the word competencies, but it's a common term that we all understand.
Yeah.
They brought in competencies that declare openly that we believe that everybody has leadership qualities, and these are the leadership qualities that we are looking for. So let's think about not just what we do in our job. I think this is the big shift for me, not just what we do in our job, but how we do it as well. And I think that is so important.
Yeah, now that's interesting also, because we've been hearing that message about, it's not just what you do, it's how you do it for many, many years, yet it hasn't really made much change to leadership behaviors.
No.
And it sounds from what you're saying that you're seeing examples now of actually that it is beginning to make a change.
Yeah, and I don't know, John, I think that the pandemic really started us off on that, because suddenly leaders couldn't keep tabs. This ability to micromanage, control, that power that we had, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in the respect that leaders needed to feel that they were doing a good job, and that the way they did that was by keeping tabs on everybody. The pandemic just threw all of that up, and they weren't able to keep that watchful eye on people in the same way. I think that started off with grave concerns from people.
Yep.
But I think that generally, certainly the clients that we've worked with have been really pleasantly surprised by just what has been achieved, and how incredibly creative and motivated and adaptable their teams have been. And I think that's been a real eye-opener for them.
I think it's, and I agree entirely, because I've also seen it in some of the teams that we work with, and I think it's probably testament to human beings that actually society didn't completely implode, despite the fact that like nobody could go to work and things in ways that they've been doing for decades, if not centuries. It sounds very much like one of the things that we need to do is to reframe what success means in leadership terms. So whereas before success might have meant for the individual climbing up the hierarchy, and for the organization, that individual spearheading or taking the credit for successful performance. Now we need to reframe that, first of all, maybe because everybody needs to take the credit.
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that underpins the shift, do you think, in behaviors?
Yeah, I think give credit where credit's due. If you don't recognize just what people do, they soon get really fed up, don't they? And I think people are realizing that. I think that because leaders have been surprised by what has come from their teams, the stories that I could tell you are phenomenal. Just the joy that leaders have demonstrated when they've been sharing their examples of what their teams have been doing is wonderful. So I think they're kind of now almost automatically by default, it's sort of they've become these role models where they are actually talking about, oh, so and so did this and wasn't it amazing, and we also share, don't we, so much more. Social media has made it so easy to give almost worldwide recognition to individuals and give kudos where kudos is due.
Yeah, absolutely. And interesting, because this picks up something in which I know you're deeply interested in, which is issues of trust. And do you think, or how do you think we can start to prepare leaders, particularly not so much future leaders, but next leaders and some of those already in place, for the depth of debate that emerges when we allow people to feel trusted and therefore to start those internal debates? How do we help leaders prepare for that?
I think that, this is a little bit what we talked about in the podcast, in respect that I think the biggest problem is that a lot of leaders don't trust themselves first. So they close down the discussions before they become, Pandora's box that they can't reseal. I think that we prepare people by helping them see just how amazing they are as individuals. I believe, our businesses inspire your genius. We absolutely believe that there is a little genius inside every person just waiting to be unleashed, really. And the main challenge is that people don't believe it for themselves. So we need to evidence for them what that is. I think some people need the mirror really held up to them. They don't necessarily see it for themselves. So I think it's twofold. It's one, building that ability to self-reflect. In our busy worlds, we don't do enough self-reflection that goes, was that okay? What could I do differently next time? Just really, really quickly. So we need to help them with that. And we need to hold up the mirror to them so that they can see the evidence for themselves about the magic that they actually perform. That then starts building that inner confidence. When you have that, it is so easy to enter into any discussion, because you realize you don't need to be perfect. What we keep saying, you don't need to be perfect. You need to be prepared to go there.
Really, really, that's very clever, actually, because when I think about that, we hold a mirror up to people to let them know how clever they are. And I mean clever in the proper sense of the word, how innovative, how smart, how intelligent, how far-sighted, stuff like that. Actually, we can do that, of course, for the leadership figures also, to let them know that actually, you know what, this is how you appear. This is how you appear. And when you are trusting and therefore increasingly trusted, actually you appear much more positive, and which will actually help to give the leadership figures confidence, not just those people who are in the rest of the organization. And that's quite a challenge, actually, for leaders to cope with that.
We were working with a group last week, and it was absolutely fascinating because they had all the ideas. They didn't need any extra people, money, resources of any kind to make the change that they really believed would create a better workplace for them and a more efficient workplace, delivering the goods for the business. You know, this is commercial reality as well. It's not just, we'd love it to be nicer. This was hard-nosed commercials that they were talking about. And what they lacked was the confidence to make it happen. And so we had to work really hard with them to get the grittiness to make those first steps. And when you start doing little small steps really quickly, if a lot of people are making those small steps, you start to see significant change. We often kind of do the, wouldn't it be lovely if we could? And it becomes this dream that's out there that never gets realized. It's like really drawing it down and helping them believe, actually, I can do that first little bit. I'm going to do it.
Now that's clever and also very interesting. Wendy Ganaway's made a couple of points actually in the comments, really vital points which pick up on that. And Wendy mentioned this idea of soft skills, which of course is, as we all know, is a pretty iffy concept in a lot of ways. And Wendy herself says she doesn't like that phraseology at all. And many of us get a bit what's the word? A bit twitchy about soft skills.
It's a bit woolly, isn't it?
Listen, but as Wendy herself points out, you know, these are human skills. And interestingly, you mentioned the word grittiness earlier on, because there is a very hard edge to these human skills.
Absolutely.
This ability to enter into relationships with people, because that's not the sort of language we normally use at work and things like this. Do you think that, well, I suppose, do you think that we are working hard enough and well enough to encourage the understanding of that grittiness required in those human skills? Or are we still talking about soft skills and letting people think fluffily about it?
I think there's definitely a change, John, but, you know, for my liking, it's not coming fast enough. You know, we've been talking about this for 20 years. It's that kind of thing. And I'm minded, something's just popped in my mind. So we're parents of adopted children, and there's a lot of talk about therapeutic parenting. And therapeutic parenting is about providing really strong structure and boundaries with a huge amount of compassion and love. That's not dissimilar to what we're talking about here. I think that the problem when you start talking about soft skills is you do think that they're a bit cuddly and lovey. And we do all the really nice things and we bend over backwards to support each other. That is not what we're talking about. There absolutely is a hard edge to it. You know, what's soft about having courage? What's soft about taking risks? What's soft about having the analytical skills to solve problems? But you do it with compassion and collaboration and relationships, because none of us live in an ivory tower, do we? We have to work with other people, and we all need to get the best out of those relationships.
Absolutely. And Wendy actually in the comments has pointed out, she says, I'm not soft, John. And I absolutely understand that, because what the point, and I know the point that Wendy was making was this idea that what we call soft skills are human skills. And actually they do have that, in a sense, almost like the iron glove, the iron fist in the velvet glove in a lot of ways, really. And the term, Jane has mentioned, the term power skills has been used rather than soft skills. One of the things that's interesting about this maybe is we have developing now a language which is becoming very disparate. And actually, maybe we're losing focus around what it is we want to achieve.
I was just, you know what, you took the words right out of my mouth. It just occurred to me that how pedantic we get about language, because we don't want it to be interpreted incorrectly. And so we spend a lot of time focusing in on what are the words that we're going to use. But if we go back to being more human, we often get our language wrong. You know, we often make mistakes. Let's cut each other some slack and be prepared to explain and explore with each other. And I think that it's this thing, isn't it? No two people look at the same situation and take exactly the same information from it.
Yeah.
So the skill, I think, for leaders is finding the bridge. What is the bridge between what you perceive and what I perceive? So, Wendy was talking about soft skills, and I know that one of the words that she uses very wisely is tactical skills.
Yep.
Jane said about power skills.
Yep.
Let's explore, what is that bridge? What is our meaning behind it? So that there's a common interpretation that we can all work with.
I really like that analogy of finding the bridge between, in a sense, between different understandings. So one of the things we were talking about in the leadership development program the other day is having a shared understanding. And maybe one of the primary roles, I guess, of not just leadership figures, but all of us in relationships, is to try and find that bridge so that we get some shared understanding, I guess, really.
And isn't this where, if you go back to your first question about our leaders throughout the organisation, is just that ability to go, John, I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand? My interpretation is, all of us can do that. We don't need to have a leader in our title.
Yes.
But it is an absolutely essential leadership quality, that ability to elevate from the weeds and be the best that we can, because that's my interpretation of leadership, elevating from the weeds, being the best that we can, and helping those around us be the best that they can. That doesn't need to have a job title. That's just about us wanting to show up and be great.
Yeah, and it also, of course, doesn't need to have a sort of inherent invulnerability. I have to admit, one of the most common words that I use is "oops." because like loads of people, I make loads of mistakes and things, and actually I think one of the things somebody said to me once, one of the things that's useful about talking to you, John, is that you don't assume people are perfect. And then they followed it up by saying, because you're so imperfect yourself, which is, frankness. Yes. Thank you for that piece of insight.
I remember very early on in my training career.
Yeah.
We when we set up the business, we were pitching for a piece of work with a large corporation, and we were the newbies on the block. So they were doing a test run. They gave us a pilot, and then a very much more experienced learning and development company a pilot, and they were going to decide after that who they were going to take on for the big piece of work. Yeah. So I went along with a colleague. I tripped up over the flip chart and literally got a nosebleed and had to sort myself out. My colleague walked in the door and spilt coffee down her. So she had a white blouse with coffee stains down her. And so we got off to a flying start. Anyway, the workshop went really, really well. We got the large contracts. I said to the client, what was it that made us get that? And she said, you weren't perfect. We have people that stand at the front of the room and spout, and they are so knowledgeable, so expert, and have so much of themselves there that people don't feel that they can live up to those expectations. And so the value of the learning is reduced. So you were human people, you rolled with it, you coped with what went on, and you still gave the learning. That for me was such an important, you can imagine I was deeply embarrassed. It's an important lesson actually about, we don't need to be perfect, we show up and we just get on with it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. And in fact, actually, Wendy and Katie have both picked up on what you've been talking about, because in the comments, they're talking about authenticity. And that's the being honest with oneself and with everybody else. And I think, I used to train people partly by getting them to practice getting things wrong.
Yeah.
Because sooner or later it will go wrong. You go up on stage and you trip going up there and all of that sort of stuff. And because actually we should allow ourselves to feel like that. Very interesting. Very interesting. It made me think of another question, which is you've been helping organizations for years with 21st century ideas, like this idea of making the workplace more human. And we're talking about those human skills and stuff like this. How do we get those principles into the mainstream of leadership development? Because there are loads of different people who are producing and providing leadership development courses, universities, training companies, all this. How do we get those principles into that delivery, that proposition?
I think the most effective learning is when it's practical.
Right.
You know, we can all share all the models and theories and principles that we want to about 21st century leadership, but unless it's practical, it doesn't make any difference. And so everything that we do is deeply rooted into the practice. And like you know, practice what might possibly go wrong. Do it.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens and work through, almost like backtracking the consequences of it.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that learning has to stop being abstract.
Yep.
You know, there's one thing to devour the knowledge and for it to be in our head. It's got to go into our heart and into our hands and feet to make the difference. Yep. And we talk about, you know, 3 things make the change: what you focus on, your physiology, you know, the state that you're in. If you're ambivalent to something, you ain't going to do anything, are you?
Yes.
You've got to want it. You've got to really, really want it. So learning has to work on that emotional level as well. You've got to carve out the information, dissect it in so many different ways that people want it. They can really envisage the difference and build the confidence in them and the commitment to make those changes, because it's only them that are going to change it. You can't do it for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then they have to be prepared to take action, which is what we talked about earlier. You know, go for little steps first. So it's those 3 things. And I think the problem is with a lot of learning is that it's still quite abstract.
Yeah. And actually, I guess, do you think that's because it's actually easier to teach in the abstract, to teach principles and concepts and, you know, give people a few instructions and stuff like that, rather than to focus on what are my audience learning?
It's no different to being a leader in an organization. You know,
right.
If I teach a model, that's me. You know, this is my knowledge. Aren't I clever? And you know, and again, I don't mean it derogatory. It's about our natural safety mechanisms. You know, our self-preservation.
Yep.
As soon as people start asking questions, there's potentially a vulnerability.
Yes.
And what we try and do is we learn all of this stuff. You know, that's really important to us. But we then translate it into activities so that the teams are developing ideas for themselves. So it's coming from them. Leaders in organizations worry about what they're going to do when they open Pandora's box.
Yep.
I think learning and development professionals sometimes worry what they're going to do when they open Pandora's box. If I'm the sage at the front of the room, it's a much easier job than being the guide or the coach on the side, because you don't know what's going to happen that way. But that is the way that people are going to make a difference.
And maybe that's one of the reasons why when you talk about learning being in the abstract, it's a protection mechanism for the people doing the teaching, if you like, really. And I must admit, you know, we again, thinking about training and developing people and stuff, training people actually to you know, many of us have had what they call media training. So, you know, training to cope with very hard questions, coming at one relentlessly, one after the other, until actually, and I know in the training, they actually made us break. I mean, I got to the point where I said, look, I can't do this. It's like, I was close to it. It was either get mad or burst into tears. So I said, right, I've had enough of this. I can't do this. And of course, the beauty of something like that is rehearsal. And it comes back to your point about
such a good word,
practical training and development and stuff. Rehearsal is a form of training. And it's the most useful form of training because it helps us to understand what's going on in our bodies and our minds when stuff goes wrong. Very interesting.
You know, if you can't do it in the safe space of a training room where the impact, other than potentially to your getting a little bit of a damaged ego, you know, but that's nothing, is it? You know, the training room is a safe place to do these things. If you're not prepared to do it or can't do it in the training room where there are no consequences, you're not going to do it for real.
Wow, interesting. When you said then, actually, you know, doing it in the training room, it's easy to do. It's okay to do that in the training room. Actually, of course, for many, many people, ego is almost how, leadership or leadership position is how they define themselves to themselves, and this is where that hierarchical influence starts to come in. And I think
Pandora's box is a real worry.
Absolutely,
so you were talking about how do we prepare people for this debate about trust and opening things up. We need them to understand that it's not actually about your ego. It's not about that. And if you can let that go, if you can let that go and replace it with something more resourceful, actually your ego is validated. It becomes kind of an upward spiral rather than a downward spiral.
I'm a bit worried about this. You mean it's not all about me?
No, John, I'm sorry, it's not.
This will come as a tragedy for enormous numbers of leaders that I know everywhere. Absolutely great.
We have a saying in our business: it's not about you; it's always about them.
Absolutely right. Absolutely, and I have to admit, and I do need to admit this. It took me some years of being in management before I realised that it wasn't all about me, and I might have been a better manager or leader since then. Since realising that, I have absolutely no idea. We'd have to ask everybody else, but it feels like I am. Once I realised it's not.
And if it feels like you are, it's going to be more natural for you. You're going to be more resourceful, all of that kind of stuff. And I think, it's the same thing, isn't it? The most common complaint that we have from leaders is that they come to me with problems. Really, mainly the reason they come to you with problems is because you continue to solve their problems for them. You're not, so let's stop that. That is a classic example of it's about me and not about them.
Yes, I suppose if leaders are always saying I'm the person with the answers, then they will always come to that person with the questions. Interesting. The one of the points that Katie made earlier on, I think, really was it's Wendy that made this point, which is it's easier to be in control and to control than it is to relinquish control. That's where the trust element is, and it's interesting because it's that word control that really matters here. And I think just one last point, if you can, please, Caroline, on the importance of that word control and deconstructing it from a leadership perspective. This is the $64,000 question.
Control is about safety. When we're in control, risk is minimized and we are protected because we know what's going to happen. It's black and white, it's logical, it's all there. But we cannot possibly have all the answers. One person cannot possibly understand that. When you are prepared to release that control, that is where the magic happens. It's the difference between kind of comfort zone and learning zone. It's we've got to be prepared to stretch out of that and do it safely for yourself. Take little baby steps to start off with, because I can guarantee that you will be positively surprised by what comes back. And that joy will give you further energy and commitment to start doing some bigger changes.
Fabulous, Caroline. What a superb conversation. Thank you so much. And 4 points I take away from this. One is about finding that bridge so we get a shared understanding between people. Learning has to stop being abstract. I really like that. It needs to be real and practical. It's not about your ego. Sadly, I've discovered that. It's not.
Folks.
That last point, the difference between the comfort zone and the learning zone, really, really important. Caroline, thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant.
It's my pleasure, John.
And thank you also to our audience who were really active in the comments, which was absolutely great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. My special thanks, of course, to Caroline, and to everybody for listening. Please do join the conversation via social media using the hashtag Leadership at the Edge. And additionally, carry on the conversation on the Hub, our community forum for leaders and managers at all levels. Getting involved is free, and you don't have to be a member of the Institute. If you're interested in accessing the Hub or finding out more, visit the website www.institutelm.com, and thank you everyone for listening.
Bye.
Bye all.